Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Certified Forgotten, the only podcast that reviews horror films with 10 or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. If that is a new piece of information for you, you didn't listen to our last two episodes, shame on you. But otherwise, people talking about inflation, we're getting with the times, we're up in the ante. We want to make sure that our guests can talk about the movies that excite them. And eventually, Rotten Tomatoes is going to put every historical review in the database, and then we're just going to be fucked. So we're going to enjoy it while we can. I am Matt Monagle. I am one half of your Matt hosts. I am joined, as always, by my friend Matt Donato. How you doing, buddy?
Doing good. And if that news about 10 or fewer reviews is not new to you, then you haven't listened to a single episode, and we're mad at you.
Oh, that's true too. You're either well in the know or completely out of the know. And either way, welcome. This is a good episode for you to be joining us on. The goal here is to talk about films that have not gotten the distribution they deserved or not gotten the coverage that they deserved. And we talk to a lot of different people from a lot of different sides of the film industry and kind of unearth some of their favorite hidden gems. And I think we have a good guest today, a guest that I have been meaning to get on the show for a long time, who will probably yell at me both on mic and off about why it's taken us so long to get him on the show. Donato, can you please introduce today's friend on the show?
Absolutely. If you have seen this person's tweets, you probably don't know they have a British accent. They are Mr. Richard Whittaker, the culture editor for the Austin Chronicle, and also Matt Monagle's boss.
It's true.
And very lucky to be so.
Yeah,
He's
thank
lovely.
you.
He's lovely.
It's true.
Nobody is prepared to take trash off my hands like Matt. That is his area of expertise. He has taken up more garbage reviews, and bless you for taking them, sir.
So the thing for me though is that you I am the king at getting those Tuesday mid-morning emails, but like, we have a screener, can somebody take it? Like, I love taking those. That's sort of my favorite thing. The range of outcomes of things that I get is sometimes you give me something and it's a moonfall, and sometimes you give me something and it's a wandering earth. And that really is, like, to me, the range of potential outcomes and like these random last minute one screen in Austin kind of things. And I love it. I've seen movies, I've seen incredible films I never would have watched because you assign them. World War II documentaries, foreign films about economics and bridge building and politics. And I've seen just the worst shit I could possibly imagine. And you know what? I'm never going to be sad about that range of outcomes. It beats reviewing Marvel stuff every week.
Those 11 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, we've suddenly crammed a single screening. It's going to be at noon at a something that in a more fair and just universe would be a dollar repertory theater. And yes, some of them are hot garbage. And then I'd say like 80% of them are hot garbage. And then once in a while, we get some real gems. You're just like, how did nobody see this coming? And it's just these contractual obligation screenings that somebody's getting just because they got a VOD deal, and part of the VOD deal was that they get distribution. They're going to be shown theatrically in 12 markets, and Austin is often one of those 12 markets. It's like us and Duluth, and I'm nothing against Duluth, but not exactly, Grauman's Chinese theater, shall we say. So we're just still in this weird position where we're a film town that just people will just throw strange little release at us and nobody sees them coming in. We both stepped up on more than a few of those.
So normally we kind of go to the beginning and do this whole like chronological progression. What was your first horror film? What got you interested in the genre? But Richard, since you're talking about kind of like the film distribution angle, I want you to kind of expand on that a little bit, because we do have a lot of listeners in Austin, because Donato and I both have really good connections here in the city. And I think where Austin is situated geographically, but also metaphorically and literally between New York and LA, I think it's a really interesting story. So maybe talk a little bit about kind of in your role as the Chronicle, the advocacy component and how much time you spend trying to make sure that Austin is getting qualities of films, is considered a major release market in the way that, like the Chicagos of the world are also struggling to do.
It's such a weird thing because so much of film distribution is still built around daily newspapers. And I know this is just a weird thing to do, but people look at the daily and go, well, how big is it? What's the distribution? Is distribution rising? Is distribution falling? Do people read stuff in there about film, and they'll make decisions based on that, which is this weird, antiquated process that kind of really fell out of any relevance in the 90s. And Austin, to a great degree, was ground zero for the film blog, and so many prominent bloggers came out of here that just not anything to do with where the industry was. And in the 90s and early 2000s, we really didn't have much of a film industry. We'd had a lot in the 80s and very, very early 90s, and a lot of TV movies shot here. But what you have is people who are going to things like Austin Film Society. They're going to the famous, now forgotten, Dolby Theater. They were going to the VHS rental stores, and they're going out and setting up blogs. So we've kind of got this weird position where we have a lot of tastemakers in town, and some studios really respond to that and think it's really important that they open in Austin. Some of them have got these legacy relationships. So like, Samuel Goldwyn Mayer have a great relationship with the Regal Arbor in Austin, which is generally regarded as the pensioner and retiree cinema. But we got everything they release opens at this one cinema. So we're kind of in this weird place of like somewhere between an established market, somewhere between a very cool market. We have a lot of film festivals. So this is where not always the biggest films are going to play at some of these festivals, but stuff that's really looking to get a few reviewer eyes on it. And you can go to any screening during a festival, and there'll probably be 2 or 3 critics, some of them from very small things, some who just happen to be in town. But the fact they're doing it in Austin gives stuff it's this weird cachet about Austin as a film town that it's had since it was a fraction of the size. Nobody knows, Austin's kind of expanding at a rate of knots, but we've punched above our weight for a long time. Sometimes the studios really realize this, sometimes they don't. So, I mean, part of my job is to be, we're the print outlet that is every week. I will review, if a film opens here and it has, and a screener is made available, we'll run a review. That's my rule. Like if it's got more than 3 screenings, so it's not just like an art house repertory doing a couple of showings, I'll review it. I will put somebody on it because there's so many of these films that really deserve a screening. I think people realize that. I think people want to know about the smaller stuff because it's not going to play anywhere else. Maybe we are, like I said, we're one of the 12 markets that actually shows it for a full week. If we're the market where somebody shows something for a full week and people actually turn up, but it's not the empty screen at noon where it's just the guy sweeping up popcorn from the night before, that's important. I genuinely think that's important for getting word about films out there. And yeah, sometimes studios don't necessarily see we're here, which is weird because we're a film town. We're heading up to a population of 1 million. We're the 11th biggest city in America. But sometimes people will still go, we really don't need to open that film in Austin. I'm like, what is wrong with you?
Right.
I've had these arguments with distributors over the years. Like, can you just, that thing that opened, like with, not to name names, but there's a high profile documentary that's going to be on a lot of Oscar lists this year that people are expecting it to be in the announcement. We've been waiting since December for it to open in Austin. I'm like, what are you doing? We've just got so many people who are eager to see films. We're a film viewing town. Austin Film Society has played a huge role in that. The Alamo has played a huge role in that. Just people out there going like, you come here to watch movies. And people will actually take vacations for that. We're like, who else goes to a town just to go see films? It never happens. Park City, but they're also going for skiing. You ain't skiing in Austin.
I was going to say, like, when I was thinking about where to move from New York City, when I was very done with New York and wanted a different place to go, but also wanted that film culture and wanted to go to a film city, my only choices were LA and Austin, and like they were neck and neck. And I think about Austin, what you're talking about of how it is a film area, film city, whatever you want to call it. Like, festivals are huge for me for that, because pre-pandemic, when I was traveling, Fantastic Fest, South by Southwest. That was like 4 weeks out of my year that I spent in Austin. Like that was more than I think I've spent in any other city ever for like the 6 years plus that I was attending those festivals yearly. And how much I saw there, how much that just ingrained in my head that like Austin was a film city and like all the stuff you're saying. Like I never thought twice about it being like a smaller market. I actually thought it was like a bigger market, the way that like even Fantastic Fest was pulling in films that I thought were punching way above their weight for, an Alamo Draft House festival. So like that was always fresh in my mind. I'm like, I'm either going to be in LA or Austin. I like both vibes, and both vibes give me such opportunity to continue what I'm doing with film. That like it was such like a coin flip, and it was barely edged out for LA. But no, I've always seen Austin as like a film city, I guess, to
Well,
describe it as that.
there's actually Austin hosts more film festivals, and I'm not kidding on this, than any other city,
I believe it.
including New York and LA. We have more dedicated film festivals, and we run the gamut. We got Fantastic Fest, we got South by, we got Austin Film Festival, which is very writer centric. We got Other Worlds, which is science fiction with a horror substrand. We got AGLIF, the Austin, formerly the Austin Gay and Lesbian International Film Festival, now All Genders Lifestyles Film Festival. We just, we have Indie Meme, which is all from all Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi films. We got Austin Asian American. We just have this incredible variety, and if you got an interest as a film fan, there's probably a film festival for you. We've even got these like real underground festivals, like we've got Austin Revolution Film Festival is coming up, and I don't think they've ever played anything with a budget over $5,000, including features. This is real run and gun stuff, but that's what we do. You can pretty much I would say every week go to a film festival, but I wish that was true because quite often they're over each other. So some weeks I'm like, oh God, I got 3 festivals to do. Well, just not sleeping. They keep clear of the big ones, but the small ones kind of pile on each other, or they last, 3 or 4 weeks. So they're just, you're just kind of working out which one you want to cover at any one point. But yeah, we're a film viewing town that is increasingly becoming a film making town as well. And we've got this long tradition of indie filmmakers. We've now got a big infrastructure base for making bigger films, a lot of TV series here. But we started that because we're a film watching town, and it's such a part of the identity. I think, I argue with people all the time because we're the live music capital of the world, and I'm like, well, yeah, fine. I upset some people, say, if you want to go down and walk down 6th Street and hear 4 different bands in adjoining bars playing the same Stone Temple Pilots cover, great. This sometimes is a really great town for you. But if you want real variety, look what's showing in our cinemas. We've got drive-ins showing art house movies. Where else can you say that? I mean, we've been called the Third Coast for years, and I think that's really true for films. It's us, New York and LA, when people are really talking about opening a film at a festival when they want eyes on it, when they want cachet, and people take risks here. South by Southwest is famous for there'll be a Friday, there'll be a Friday or Saturday night opening weekend R-rated comedy, Sausage Party. That played first at South by, and people were like, "This is not going to work. This is not the place to show it." And it opened. It played the Saturday night at the Alamo Ritz, blew the doors off, and they went, "Okay, we actually have something." That's the other thing. I think we're a very receptive audience in Austin. And I think that's what defines us. We'll if it's bad, we just stop talking about it. If it's good, we'll sing the praises to the high heavens.
And that's I always liked kind of the curatorial aspect I think that you're describing, because when I was in grad school, I studied under Ira Deutschman, who, if you know the New York film scene, Ira Deutschman is like a well-respected independent film producer who's worked in like Basketball Diaries was one of his projects. He's any independent film that's set in New York, he probably had a hand in it, and he works with a lot of producers that come out of the film scene there. So this is a man that spends his life going to film festivals, and he always said to anyone that would listen, the greatest film festival in the world is the Cleveland International Film Festival, because people are happy to be there. You get a lot of talent that travels, and it is a true best of the fest, in the sense that like it's curating stuff from other film festivals that people really want to see, and you have an audience that is going there to watch movies and is engaged with it. It's not about kind of like the publicity or glitz and glamour or premieres and things of that nature. It's about true film lovers going and seeing movies at this festival that's curated just for them. And I think I wouldn't have been able to articulate it until this conversation, but I think that's something that I see a lot in stuff like, any of the many mission driven film festivals that we have, but also, South by Southwest has a really good Best of the Fest program. A lot of, Fantastic Fest is notorious for reprogramming really good titles from other genre festivals around the world. I like living in a city where not everything that plays at a festival is going to be a premiere. I like this Best of the Fest thing because it is a little egalitarian. It is sort of saying, yeah, we want to give people access to good movies wherever they come from, wherever they started, and make sure that people here get a chance to watch them. Especially as we all know, with film distribution, traditional film distribution shrinking, less screens, more blockbusters, the ability to see an independent film from another country at a film festival, that might be the only chance you ever get to see that film on a big screen.
And we're also very lucky because we do have programmers around here who are prepared to go, let's push the envelope. We'll take the risk on, maybe a 2 or 3 year old release that didn't open in Austin originally. Somebody's paid for a 4K restoration. We'll bring it back, and we'll do 5 screenings at the Alamo or the Austin Film Society Cinema or at Blue Starlight Drive-In, and we'll take that risk. And maybe nobody turns up, but if they do, then we'll book more screenings. And it's one of the interesting things for me about Austin and programming is a lot of places, particularly the bigger chains, they're so locked in by contractual obligations that even if they want to show something, they don't have the space. They're told, well, you want, the next Fantastic Beasts, you have to take 5 prints and you have to do a minimum number of screenings per day. And well, you lose the leeway. Whereas, we've got enough of that kind of film society, alternative cinema, independent booking approach, so that people are much more willing to go, I'll roll the dice and show something that maybe nobody will turn up, but I'm only booking it for 2 screenings because I've got the capacity to just do 2 screenings. I don't have to run everything the same thing every day. And I think that's not unique to Austin, but us having multiple venues that are prepared to do that is a little bit more leeway than I think you see in a lot of other markets, where they're literally going like, we've got one art house cinema, who's doing, yeoman's work, but they can only carry so much of the load.
Richard, I could talk to you about the Austin film scene forever, and I probably will, because as you previously established, you are my boss. But I do want to take a little bit of time and talk a bit about you too, because I think there are probably going to be people that will only know you as a film writer, but I think that there might be some people that are listening to this and are like, I remember Richard back when he was on the political beat. So I'd love, because I don't think I've ever actually asked you this question. I'd love to talk a little bit about how you got started in politics and why you leapt at the opportunity to cover film when that door kind of cracked open for you a little bit.
Oh, well, I have never taken a direct route to anything in my life. That's the one truism. My first 2 degrees out of far too many, because for some unknown reason, I kept falling back into academia for my sins, were actually in medieval history.
Sure.
So take that for what you want. And I actually worked for the Yorkshire Archaeological Trust for a while. And then I went into print production management. Yeah. So you need somebody to put your university curriculum together and send it to the printers. I'm your man.
Booming industry now, print production.
Oh, yeah. But then, in the mid-90s, I actually worked for an organization called DFAX, which was a specialist defense news agency. That was actually paid for by the Quakers. So every story we wrote was secretly pacifist and pro-disarmament. And I worked on 2 titles, Hang On To Your Hats, International Peacekeeping News, and Disarmament Diplomacy, both of which only ran about 300 copies printed of each issue, but they were kind of the trade journals for their... I know. How do you end up here?
So when you say that they were secretly pacifist, you actually meant they were overtly pacifist.
Yes.
Okay, I got you.
But they were for basically, if you were involved in the disarmament industry of, you were negotiating, or you want to keep up with, what was being talked about in relation to armed propagation, AK-47 propagation in the Middle East, or who was trying to pretend that they were developing chemical weapons in Africa. We were your go-to publication, weirdly enough. And while I was working with them, I that's when I first fell initially into doing some film criticism, just because I loved film, and just I had my own blog back then, and that kind of did that did that in the background for years, just a hobby. And then when I did come to the States, and I went to the University of Texas to do my master's in journalism, because I've been freelancing over the years, written for some weird publications. I wrote for a cycling magazine once, even though I don't bike and I have no sense of balance. I wrote for 14 Times, the magazine of paranormal studies. And when I went to UT, I just kind of ended up doing politics stuff because I was fascinated by it, because Texas politics is just a car crash.
Oh yeah.
And it turned out I had a knack for it, particularly because I was very dismissive of a lot of stupidity that a lot of people would just go, well, that's just how Texas does things. I was like, yeah, but that's idiotic and dangerous.
It's called an
And
outsider perspective, Richard. You brought an outsider perspective.
I was also prepared to have people never talk to me again. So that was helpful. Rick Perry had this very particular look on his face whenever I'd ask a question in a press conference. It looked like somebody had given him a very old, dry, sour lime to suck on, but he had to pretend it was cake. So it was just this mixture of like, I got to do this, but I really don't want to do it, and nothing about this fills me with even a modicum of pleasure. So that made me very happy. And the thing about the Chronicle is that it's always been a small ship. So if you're prepared to do something else, they'll let you. So as the years went on, I kind of like slowly expanded the amount of film coverage I did. Started off just doing some festival coverage because they really needed people at festivals. And then I was like, well, we don't have a DVD column, do we? And they're like, we don't care. If you want to do it on your own time. And I'm like, okay. Because I was kind of doing it on my own time anyway. And this meant more free DVDs. Yes. Which then became free Blu-rays. Yes. Which then became free streaming links. And over time, I think, just steadily, moved back to kind of where my passion always was. So it's not less moving straight across and more kind of like letting them know that I was doing this anyway, and then letting me just build that up over time. So it's kind of been this weird, complicated thing. But yeah, I mean, there are people who, still know me as, this nonsense guy from the token British guy around the Texas legislature, and but there are other people who only know me from terrible film opinions, and advocacy for films that they're like, how could you like that? And I'm like, I don't care, shut up. Which is kind of my métier.
Well,
people just go on that I think that I'm just pointlessly iconoclastic or contrarian. I'm like, no, this is just my taste. Like, how do you not get this? Like, this is just from my weird background of like 80s British indie films, and staying up too late and watching films that I should never ever have been watched.
Yeah, there's a lot of, you can say a lot of things about your taste, Richard, but authentic is it's the only word you could describe. Your taste is authentically yours.
Nobody's going to pretend to have my tastes.
No, why would you? Why would you? But that does raise the question is I think of you. I don't think of you exclusively as a genre guy, because I think you're like me in the sense that I think of you as somebody who can write about everything. But like, if you basically give you a stack of DVDs and say, choose the ones you want to write about, you're going to pull out like some of the indie horror titles. So was genre stuff always the thing? Whether that's, I know you do a lot of coverage with like sci-fi and horror and things of that nature. Were you always drawn to genre cinema? Or is that something that is kind of a reflection of, for all the reasons we talked about before, what's there to cover the most in Austin?
Oh no. I mean, the the moment that damned me, and set me on the path that I'm on, was 1978 when Star Wars opened in the UK. It did not open in 1977 in the UK. Back then, you had to wait 3 to 6 months for whatever was playing in the US to finally make it to the UK. And what they do, and I'm not kidding on this, the prints would turn up looking like garbage
Mm-hmm.
because they were the same prints that had played the US, and they'd wait until they'd finished doing their American run, and then they'd just splice the BBFC ratings card at the beginning, and then you'd watch the film. And if you stuck around to the end, it would have the MPAA rating card on the end on the end of the last reel. They wouldn't cut it off, which is how I discovered there was such a thing as American ratings. When like I was this young kid, but yeah, day one, I was there with my grandmother, and she, Star Wars opened at the Macclesfield Majestic, which was this classic 1930s picture house that was like white marble front, and just, the seats hadn't been changed since the 30s. And I went in, and big ship chasing little ship, done, completely doomed from that point on. Just changed my world. And horror, you can blame a combination of juvenile insomnia, parents that slept like a log, and the BBC. Because my parents on a Saturday night would go to bed early. They were in bed by 10. I could not sleep when I was a kid. I was always waking up really early and staying up too late. So I'd go to bed when I was told, and then I'd wait for them to go to bed. And I'd creep downstairs and put the television on and sit about 2 foot away with the volume way down so I could hear it and nobody else in the house could. So basically it's like, proto IMAX, right up against the screen. Everything's just around you, even though, it's a, old fashioned tube, so you could see the individual dots.
4X, baby, 4X.
Oh, beautiful. And the BBC would have this terrible habit of, on a Saturday night, they'd show horror double bills. And they just put random stuff on, like pairings that you're just like, what on earth were you thinking? So, sometimes they go, well, we're going to show, the original Bela Lugosi Dracula, and then, Christopher Lee and Dracula 2000. Just Dracula 1981. Just these random combinations, or they'd show, Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. And I was like 6 at the time. And I remember watching this stuff and I'm like, okay, this is great. This is what I want to watch for the rest of my life. And then you drop Star Wars on top of that, and I'm just doomed. And, that and a combination of, Ray Harryhausen, which Harryhausen has a particular place in the British psyche, because they were the first, really the first effects movies that people associate with being really British effects movies. And yet they were always on at major holidays. So like Christmas and Easter, ITV, which is the BBC's rival, they'd show a Ray Harryhausen film. That would be their big thing. So, you'd watch you'd watch Sinbad, or, when they finally got it, they'd show Clash of the Titans. But, it was the big thing. You'd wait and you'd watch the Harryhausen film. Watching the skeletons fighting, I was just like, this stuff's amazing. But you kind of, when I was young, I was like, oh God, you got to wander through like this story. I don't care. But as years went on, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try and appreciate the story. And like then in the mid 80s, I was, when I was old enough to take the train on a Saturday afternoon up to Manchester, which was the nearest big city, and go to the art house cinema up there. And literally I'd just go and like, well, what's on? And I'd go up in the morning, take the first train that I could, and go to the comic store, load up on the comics that I could get, see if Fangoria was in, because you didn't always get it. And so if you saw a copy of Fangoria or Starlog or Starburst, you'd grab it because you wouldn't be guaranteed you'd ever see it again. So I just
Mhm.
have these like weird random copies of magazines from that era. And then I'd go to the Corner House, which was the art house cinema, and just watch whatever was going to play in time for me to get my train home at 6 o'clock. So you're just dropping these completely random whatever was on, Making Mr. Right, or Le Flick, or whatever was in that slot, and it tended to be like slow character driven stuff because that was what they booked. So that was made me go, oh, I can appreciate slow burn stuff. So then as and this I think has fed into my love of real slow burn horror over the years, which I know we've talked about, Matt, in the past. Well,
Hell yeah.
Matt M. I mean, it's like I'm always, you put something like a dark song in front of me, and I'm like, this is the best thing ever. Can it be 5 hours longer, please? That's just,
Yeah.
I think you just have this maelstrom of influences that it's like, can we have gore but slow? Can we have character driven, and then everything goes to hell at the end? That's perfect for me. That's just what I want. Plus,
Mhm.
occasionally big ship chasing little ship. That's I'm a man of simple pleasures.
I have a quick question before we get to the movie portion of this episode. But so, I mean, like with the video nasty era and like the censorship and things like that going a lot along, like, were there any horror flicks that you ended up watching, home at first and maybe edited down by the video nasty board that you then watched later, maybe like in America or something, that you realized like, oh, I haven't seen the whole film?
Well, here's the thing. I remember the video nasty era, and what people kind of look at it and go like, oh well, it was super censorious. But what they forget is that the home video market before the video nasties thing really hit was just a mess. People were turning their front rooms. Where I lived, they would literally, you can see these people go, oh well, this is what a video store looked like, and it's it's Suncoast, or it's Blockbuster, or it's kind of or it's Scarecrow, and it's these big places with lots of tapes. That wasn't my experience growing up in a small town in the north of England, the town of Macclesfield, where precisely two things happened. One, it was the centre of the British silk trade, and two, Ian Curtis of Joy Division killed himself there. That's it.
Mm.
That's all we've got. And my first video store, some guy just bought a load of tapes, um, sealed the front of his house off from the back, and turned his living room and his front hall into a video store. And that was it. And you paid £3 to rent for 2 days because tapes at that point were really expensive. And you'd go in, and he had everything alphabetical. There was no sections. So you'd have, Driller Killer right next to some Romanian version of the Ugly Duckling, or some Bratislavian animated fairy tale next to a weird bootleg of Flesh for Frankenstein. Just like none of this made any sense. So it was really easy for people to come in and say we need to crack down on this, and unfortunately, the people who cracked down on it hated film, thought that everything was obscene, went completely nuts, and we ended up in this weird censorious era. As the most famous, the two most famous terrible cases are one, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 being banned in the UK because not banned. Banned is the wrong word. The technical term, they were not granted certificates, so that meant they couldn't get distribution unless individual theaters went to the local councils and said, we want to show this film. Can we please get a temporary license to show this? And then they could grant permission. The rest of, nobody's going to go through that. I mean, I knew a couple of places that did. So I knew one of the first places in the UK after its initial release to show I Spit on Your Grave, the original version. And he literally went to the council and said, look, I've been given this print. I really want to show this. It's a historically important film. And they said, yeah, you can show it twice. But it was really hard. So kind of, I remember some of this stuff where it was like I was watching really inappropriate films by accident almost, and then just getting them back to the video store before anybody noticed. But yeah, we were very aware there were films we could not get. Most of what I was mostly by that point that I was really getting into horror. It was just like, you ain't gonna get Evil Dead. You're just not gonna get hold of a copy. The first time I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre, another critic I knew, and this was I think 2002, because it was like 2 years before it finally got the certification reconsidered, and he'd got hold of a third generation copy from Belgium, and he said, you have to get this back to me because this cost me a fortune to get hold of. So I watched it, and he'd just literally been sent just a random bunch of stuff because he said, well, I want this, and they said, well, you got to take 3 other tapes for it to make it worthwhile in the shipping. So they sent him that, 2 of the Ilsa movies, and one of the Chinese Manchurian occupation. We used real bodies for props. Experiment camp horrors. I can't remember which one it was now. Man Behind the Sun. Yeah. So they sent him those, and it's like a little bit of a difference there between Texas Chainsaw Massacre, an art house classic, and Man Behind the Sun, which is just don't eat for a week beforehand. So back then, and this early into the early 2000s, it was still some of the stuff you could only get through bootlegs. And knowing somebody who knew somebody who might be able to get hold of a copy. So when I first got to Austin, there was very definitely this like, just run to the video store and rent everything you can, and go to every, Terror Tuesday, which at that point was Terror Thursday, at the Draft House. And, these films that I knew of, but had never had a chance to see, because if you were only going to be able to put it out in this bastardized, heavily edited version, nobody really was interested in that. Particularly by the time DVD came around, the distributors were like, well, either we're going to put out the original version or we're not going to bother. So they just didn't bother. So we had a long delay on a lot of stuff coming out, but it's not that situation anymore. Pretty much everything has got some kind of release, and now we all have region-free players, so you can get hold of everything. So it's become redundant, but it did slow stuff up, and it did add this kind of weird cachet to a lot of classic horrors, just because you could not get hold of them. So you wanted to see the best version you could, and the best version you could was literally 3rd, 4th, 5th generation VHS copy that was being run off in a the back of a shop somewhere, and you hoped that you could actually see something through the fuzz. And that was the major thing. When I got here and everybody was so caught up with the love of 35 millimeter, and the more beaten up the print was, the cooler it was. And I'm like, still looks better than what I've been watching, because I can actually see something, and it's it doesn't have scan lines on it. Oh, it's a little bit red. Oh, I'll take that. That's a huge step forward for me.
Well, we did the intro part in reverse, I think, because we started in the contemporary landscape of Austin and backed all the way up to the early days of the 80s with you watching banned films. So, but you know what? It feels appropriate for you, Richard, to do things a little backwards. And I actually like where we ended that conversation, because I think it provides some interesting thematic connections to today's title. So when we come back from our break, we're going to talk with Richard about Warning, Do Not Play. Stick around. If you follow me on Twitter, you probably know that I'm a huge fan of board games and tabletop RPGs. So of course I'm going to be a fan of Mixtape Massacre, the slasher-themed board game from the team at Brightlight. Mixtape Massacre is everything I want from a beer and pretzels board game. I get to teach my friends how to play, and in exchange, they let me kill them. And if you're new to the Mixtape Massacre family, now is a great time to learn more with Mixtape Madness 2, their upcoming virtual game night. Visit mixtapemassacre.com/mixtape-madness to RSVP and even check out some of their cool merch. Before you think this is a paid spot, it's not. We just really fucking like the game. Back to the show. Hey, welcome back. So the episode this week is on Warning Do Not Play, which is a 2019 South Korean horror slash mystery slash found footage slash a bunch of other really interesting film genres that we'll get into in a minute. Unfortunately for me, I was not able to find any really good interviews with the cast and crew, so I don't want to disparage them by trying to pronounce their names. Usually if I can find an interview with one of the creators and I know how to pronounce their name, then I will do it. But for this, we'll just kind of stick to titles and roles. So the plot is about a contemporary filmmaker who is trying to graduate from a short that she made, a well-received short that she made, into a full-length feature film. She's got writer's block, as so many great horror filmmakers do, and she is on the hunt for inspiration and influences in the film community around her. She catches wind of this classic 10 years ago found footage horror film that apparently drove a movie theater insane and whose director disappeared into obscurity. Think Raw when it premiered at Toronto, kind of that sort of a vibe. And what she discovers is that the film may not have been actually the influence of a mere mortal. It may have been steered by the hand of a ghost who potentially led to the death of the crew. What evolves from that is sort of a film slash meta film about horror and of horror, and it takes it to some really interesting places. I'm very glad that you picked this one, Richard, because this is a Shudder exclusive, but like a lot of Shudder exclusives, there's a ton of horror that probably is a little bit more appealing, a little bit more high profile. It's kind of, as far as Shudder goes, a bit of a deeper cut, I think, which is sort of feels like it should be a catch-22, but good on Shudder for having quality programming that you can say such a thing as a Shudder deep cut. But let's start with kind of your recollections of this film, why you wanted to bring this to the table, what made this stand out for you.
Well, I mean, I love a film about filmmaking. I always have a deep soft spot for those. Usually because any filmmaker who goes, let's talk about our industry, they're working through some baggage. One of my favorite is Living in Oblivion, by Tom DeSillo, and everything in that is Tom DeSillo just complaining about the film industry, and the lead character is a very thinly veiled version of Brad Pitt, played as a complete moron. That film is great. I like everybody else. I just adore One Cut of the Dead, because that is just a great film about filmmaking. And so when I first heard about this, I'm like, oh yeah, this is right up my alley, because it's horror, but it's commentary on filmmaking, and that part of it is about unpacking, well, what's the damage that the filmmaker is bringing to this? Why are they making a film about this particular struggle? And it's kind of fascinating, because the writer director, Kim Jin-won, if you stretch your memories back to, I think it was around 2007, 2009, in between 2007 and 2009. I'm trying to remember when the exact chronology. It was released originally in 2007, did a couple of festivals. I think then it got picked up at the After Dark series of DVDs, which was basically kind of almost like curated like a festival. It was like each release series they did, there was like 6 or 7 things that had played on the festival circuit. Hadn't got picked up by any of the major studios, but really had something worthwhile, and they put this brand on them, and stuff like Grave Dancers, which got a little bit of cachet on the. I'm using that word a lot today. I don't know why. Just stuck.
It's a good word. One. Keep using it.
It's a fine word.
It's the word of the day.
Underserved.
This episode is brought to you by the number 3 and the word cachet.
Thank you. Cachet for men. But you had these films that were couldn't get released, so they just stuck them together and go, just if you pick up an After Dark, you're guaranteed a certain degree of quality, and people were picking up all of them. And one of the ones that caused a little bit of fuss was The Butcher, which was Kim Jin-won did this film that it's a film about making a snuff film, and half it is shot from the viewpoint of the torturers, and the other half is shot from the viewpoint of the tortured. it is not an easy watch. It is super violent. It's really ugly. The tone of it is very nihilist. Um, and he was not a particularly competent filmmaker at that point. So it's all the cliches of shaky cam. Half the time you can't work out what's going. It's a really good idea because from a kind of conceptual and philosophical viewpoint of like, well, why do we want to watch extreme horror? That's always a thing that's interesting to me is why we
Mhm.
are drawn to horror. Well, Kim Jong-un did this. People were talking about, well, maybe he's going to be the next great Korean horror filmmaker. He's at least going to, start pushing. It disappeared. Like, did nothing for years and years afterwards. And so what we have here is a film where the filmmaker, she's, did her cool art, it's implied that it was her graduation thesis film. Everybody liked it. She comes out, she's the hot new talent. She's got a production deal with a cool studio, and she's stuck. She can write something, but it's kind of derivative garbage. And she's very aware that she needs to do something that's going to make people actually care about this movie. And it actually opens with this whole sequence of her running from a ghost in a theater and heading into the parking lot, and it's all the J horror and K horror supernatural cliches of like, oh, the
Mhm.
lights go out coming towards her, and then she's got to use her camera to illuminate the ghost, and it's every single cliche that you were stuck with at that era. And then it's like, well, that's the script she's handed in to the distro house, to the production house. Because the guy like, why would anybody want to watch this? Everybody's done this, and it's almost like Kim Jong Un has gone like, yeah, we've all seen this. I'm going to do something new that's pushing this very, the played out idea of, the long haired ghost. I've got to do something new with that. And while there are aspects of that very burned out story in there, you've also got, first of all, you have a protagonist that is a little complicated, which is, apologies, my Korean pronunciation is abysmal, and I will freely admit that. Seo Yi Jae as Park Mi Jung, the filmmaker, and she's manipulative. She's driven by desperation. She's prepared to lie. She's prepared to steal. There's a great sequence where she's heard this story about this film that it played at a festival, and she's kind of tracked down a little bit of information about it and knows that it was like done by the guy who was supposed to be a student at Daejeon University. So she hangs around a bar and waits for a bunch of film bros to turn up and start talking about film. And it's a beautiful sequence because they're all talking about Christopher Nolan and
Hell
Denis
yes, they are.
Villeneuve,
Well, I love
which
how
is
like there's
so
even
great.
Nolan Bros in Korea. Like they
Yeah.
go out of their way to
Yeah.
be like, no, there's still Nolan Bros in Korea. Like that part makes me laugh so much.
Well,
And that's what,
it's the only kind of film bros you feel like, she like there might have been a couple people talking about David Lynch. She's like, no, not them. And then the guys come in to talk about Nolan. She's like, them. That's the ones.
absolutely. And she comes in and just like starts flirting with them and being like, "Oh, I'm the cool proper filmmaker," and they're like, "Oh, yeah, you've actually done it. You've got the deal. Oh, we've heard of you." And she kind of plays around with them to get that out of them, and it's actually a really beautifully done scene with a lot of really fascinating character beats because it also kind of introduces the one character who's going to follow her around a little bit. Ji Yoon Ho as Jun Seo, who's the best friend figure, who's kind of a film geek and a little bit nerdy, and he puts himself into bad situations because of her. But she's on the hunt for this lost film, and the more she finds out about it, it's not just that the film gets more complicated, it creates more interesting ideas about what it is that you're looking for when you talk about the inspiration behind a film. and the story of the film itself gets more complicated. But it's a film talking about about inspiration, and like how much are you passing off other people's work and ideas as your own work. And that's kind of, it's very subtly woven in there, but it, you know, you could really feel that Kim Jin Won is playing with these questions of whose story is whose.
Mhm.
At the same time, you know, and it's, you say, you mentioned found footage, and I think this is actually a slightly different genre, um, which is finding footage, which is about how we, because found footage is I've long had this big argument about what found footage is, and I'm a real purist. I basically say, look, you the only things that are not film that is discovered and put up as it was found, you know, discovered in air quotes and put up as it was found in air quotes, is a bit at the beginning saying this was found, and then maybe a card at the end going like, if you have any further
Mhm.
information. I think anything other than that is not found footage. I think it's POV footage. And you know, because I always have this argument when it comes to, you know, Cannibal Holocaust, because Cannibal Holocaust is clearly set up as a drama where they find some film and they, you know, they take it back to New York and they put it in, and then at the end the distributor goes, oh, this film must never be shown, and burns it. So you're like, okay, this isn't found footage, it's a film about found footage. And I feel this is, you know, this, if you look at that as a genre in its own right, there's some really fascinating stuff that goes on. You know, one of the best examples is Ring, because it's about the tape, and it's about, well, you know, what do you do when you are given a visual artifact, and what does that visual artifact do to you? And here, you know, Mijung is on the hunt for this footage, which nobody can seemingly find for the longest time. And there's a lot of stuff, people trying to, you know, go through old files and old desktops,
Mhm.
and there's some wonderful in jokes about, well, they sent us a thing to the film festival and we may still have the file around, but the hard disk may be corrupted, which I thought was great, because a few years ago, I talked to the director of a film called Pig, um, which played the festival circuits in, I think it's like 2006, and it's this horrible, grimy film, which is this guy gets off a, you know, he gets out of a plane and goes and tortures this woman on a farm, and it's really
It's the
grim.
Adam Mason one, right? That's the Adam
Adam
Mason,
Mason's
right?
Pig, and I talked to Adam about it, and Adam had basically said, you know, and he said to me, I made this when I was really at a low creative ebb, and I basically went out into the desert, and his term was, I vomited this film out in 5 days, and then I never thought I was going to make another film again. And it played a couple of festivals, and he kind of buried it. He was like, I'm actually, you know, I'm not ashamed of it, but I have such a you can't look at a pile of your own vomit and have a good time with it. And then South by actually called him and said, can you re-edit it? Can you put it back together? And we want to show it as like a 10th anniversary thing. And he's like, I don't even know if this exists anymore. And he said, I literally went down into my basement, which had been flooded previously, managed to find the two hard drives, pulled the files off, and as I was getting the last of the files off the second disk drive, it burst into flames. He says, if, you know, that was the only copy that existed, like nobody else had it. And if I, you know, particularly nothing that could have been, you know, there might have been like a you know, 640 pixel screen grab version of it somewhere, but this was like the
Right.
only place where an actual decent quality copy of it existed. And
It's
then I
I love
had
that we live
to,
in a time where people can say like this film doesn't exist anywhere, and there's like a thumbnail version on YouTube, and they're like, no, actually, we meant it didn't exist anywhere. I don't know what that is.
yeah, what the hell is this? And he said, you know, and like if it hadn't been for them calling him when they did, like it would have gone forever. And you know, this idea of like, well, a film was made and it played once at a film festival, you know, it kind of fits into the grand tradition of like, oh, there's this mysterious film. But the fact that in the sequence when she goes to the film festival programmers and says, "Oh, do you still have this?" And they go, "Oh, it's fucking, it's a film. Like, we get sent so many of these and they're never heard of again." And I watched that, and like, it was like somebody punched me in the heart, because the number of films I've seen at festivals that you never hear of again is endless. And I was like, oh, that's from experience. That's a filmmaker who's like, oh, I submitted some stuff and it didn't even make it to IMDb.
If only there was a podcast that dove into those movies.
Oh no, you guys are way too high profile for this. I mean, we're talking about stuff that, like,
That's true. That's true.
That is true. That is true.
Stuff that I've been to at festivals where there was me and the filmmaker and his dog, and I'm looking at him like, is this real? Am I hallucinating this? It's like Jacques Tati walks through wearing giraffe arms or something, and like suddenly I'm like, no, this film isn't real. I was dreaming. It's fine. But yeah, the films can disappear, and that there's something very low key about her search, that it's playing with this convention of, oh, the missing film that drove people mad, and but it's like, for everybody else involved, it's just like, yeah, it was this indie horror that we showed at the festival. Like, I think I remember, I think I've heard of it, but I'm not really sure. But then it does unpack as well as playing into exactly those tropes of the film that drove people mad. And like, everybody's heard of that legendary film where everybody threw up at the screening, and it's like, then you get to the bottom of it, and it turned out, oh yeah, somebody threw up, but that's because they'd been to some junket and eaten 3 pounds of rancid shrimp beforehand, and it was their own fault. Or they went to Park City, and they were fresh off the plane, went to a screening, stood up too fast, and had vertigo. Well, this happens. It's like, there's no mystique there, so you can see how somebody would fall down the rabbit hole of just like, this is just hunting for a film. This is just looking for something that we miss. So while it is part of a very established genre of, like I said, the finding footage horror, at the same time, it's also kind of stuff that we know about as people involved with film, who just go, films disappear or nobody cares. And that's again, that sequence where she goes to the Busan International Fantastic Film Festival office, which is a real film festival.
Right.
That she gets there, and they're like, who cares? But then in the background, while she's doing, up to shenanigans, you have this phone conversation where he's like, oh no, it is that film. It is the kind of mysterious missing film that you really don't want to find, and it's going to unleash hell and ghosts, and extreme violence. It plays out as, like I said, as both a very conventional find the weird film, find the story behind the weird film, find the weird filmmaker, and it does have a great weird filmmaker, Jin Seong Kyu as Kim Jae Hyun, and he's great. Like, when he comes in and he's all like, "Don't try and find my film," it's like, "Oh yeah, I want you as crazy indie filmmaker number 2 again. You're just awesome." He's such fun, and a real great counterpart.
It's such an interesting combination to what for this movie to come out now, I think, and you hit on a lot of this, Richard, when you're talking about it, but the way that it draws on the last 2 decades of Southeast Asian horror films, the way that it talks about, kind of repurposes and absorbs a lot of, we'll say, finding footage or found footage tropes, but also it kind of uses a lot of color schemes and lighting palettes that we associate with like grindhouse cinema and 1970 stuff. In particular,
there's a big sequence in red.
Lots of sequences in red.
Big one in
red. This one goes out to you, Matt.
Oh no, trust me. When you picked this, I immediately was like, I knew the film immediately because I saw it, and I was like, I couldn't believe, number one, it only had 2 reviews, and I was like, it's a Shudder exclusive too. What the hell?
But I love
that week that caught everybody's attention. And this is one of the fascinating things for me about when we talk about films that don't get enough of a reception, is the utter luck of the draw on this,
Mm.
which is just heartbreaking. The idea that you just happen to get released the same week as something else and everybody's attention's distracted by it, and you get buried just because you were a week the wrong way. What I call blind spotting phenomenon.
Mm.
I love the film Blind Spotting. It was my favorite. I think it was 2019, 18 or 19 when it came
Yeah,
out.
1819. Yeah.
My favorite film of the year. And when it played the festival circuit, it got completely overshadowed by Sorry to Bother You. And I came out of that thinking, wow, so there's only space for one Bay Area film by a black filmmaker every year. And the number of people who, like, in the intervening years have come to me and said, I feel bad that I missed Blind Spotting because this film is fantastic. And I said, I spent the last 4 years telling you this. Where were you?
Yeah.
But
Same.
it was just that it was just timing. So I need to go back and look at the release schedule and see whether there was something else that came out that week that was what everybody was talking about it and just got completely distracted. And I only saw this by accident because I literally, I occasionally I'll go, how much time do I have left in the day? And I will look and see what will fill that slot. It's like, and this is pretty brusque. It's like
86 minutes. Oh,
86 minutes.
so nice to watch a movie under 90
Just
minutes. It's great.
just a joy. So it doesn't let up. It's very brusque and very brisk, which is delight. But even I caught it. It was probably 3-4 weeks after it actually dropped on Shudder, but I was moved enough to go, I want to write a review of this. And this is the one problem with so much horror, so many horror films getting distribution now because people have realized you can stream on horror and people will turn out in big numbers and there's dedicated fan base and we have multiple horror streaming sites. And there's a lot of press who want to write about horror. So that's great. But then
it was a
we do get
June
films
release.
like this that just fall through. Yeah.
Oh, it was a June
everybody's
release. So like I'm trying to go back
everybody's
now
on
and
holiday.
I did the same thing because like at that time I reviewed everything. So I'm like, what the hell did I do? Warning, do not play. And I couldn't tell you why I didn't get to this one. It was just one of the ones I couldn't hit. And like honestly, I was shocked that I went on Rotten Tomatoes and I wasn't one of the 3 or 2 reviews because I was like, how did I even miss this one? Because I saw it when it came out. Same thing you did. Like I saw it when it came out and released because I always go to Shudder to see the new releases, even if I don't write about them. And I was just like, this is a dope little piece. And I will say it's a dope little piece because everything that you said, Richard, like it does the right things with being the haunted film, but it still produces a horror film narrative. I would call it like Screen Life too, the way it does it. It's definitely about finding footage in the way that like Archive 81 is about finding footage and how the tape affects you as the person watching. But it's also about Screen Life a little bit too, because she's using her phone for a large time to like see the ghost in an almost like Fatal Frame kind of way. So there's so many things working into it. But shortly before that, or maybe not even shortly, like maybe within a year, I saw a film called Antrim, the deadliest film ever made. And what they tried to do is they tried to sell you the deadliest film ever made. And that was my biggest, like, I hated that film. I hated that film because what you do is you tell me that you're showing me a quote unquote haunted movie that's going to be this cursed thing. And you do the fake talking heads beforehand. You tell me that it had a fake screening, that the entire theater burned down and all these things. And then you give me a movie that is just a narrative, just dud. It's also not scary. So like you've created, to me, an ineffective horror film. And then you've packaged it in a way and tried to sell it as this like cursed object. So for me, like I never fell into that experience. I completely fell off of it and I hated that film. Where I watched Warning, Do Not Play. And to everything that you said, it is doing K and J horror. It's doing those things where it's playing with the tropes it's trying to comment on at the same time and still delivering very tight cinematography, going back to what Monagle said with the reds and like the grindhouse aesthetic. And you get these great little decrepit theater scares where now you have a director who's gone to the place where the first fatal filming took place, and like the chairs are all broken down, like the awnings are all like just falling apart. So you get the haunted house aspect, you get everything that you kind of logged into, and you get the idea of where this haunted movie came from. And it's not being thrust down your throat to be like, you have to believe this is the most haunted movie that's ever been made, and like you watching it are going to be doomed. Like, no, I'm watching it as a viewer. I can watch this as a horror fan, and I can watch the story play out and tell me why this cursed titular film that should not be played is going to doom humanity if it does get out there. And like, I just thought it was just such a neat little way to tell that story in all of not even 90 minutes. So like, I was into that ride the whole way. The only thing
Yeah.
is like a lot of reviews that came out that aren't on Rotten Tomatoes and like people critiquing it and the comments and stuff like that on Shudder is they start playing with time a little bit, and there's a flipping back and forth between the modern day director and the past director's again, doomed film shoot where the ghost shows up and possesses him and his crew starts dying, where they start blending, and a lot of people seem to not be able to parse that apart, and that was the reason why a lot of the negativity kind of came down on it. I think that's why people didn't watch it too. Like, I think that word got out, and for some reason everyone kind of looked it over, but like I don't see it. I think it's tight in what it does. I think it's compact.
Yeah.
And yeah, like man, like I dig this movie. Like I usually when I tweet about a movie we watch for the podcast, I get a few people being like, "Oh man, like yeah, more people should talk about this one." Like, ain't nobody talking about warning, do not play. Like that tweet went and came, and it was just like not a single person. I'm like, yeah, no one really does know this movie. Got it.
Well, and for me, that final sequence, it's I love that
Great. It's
because
incredible.
yeah, I mean, not only is it really well executed, and that is also the moment where Kim Ji Mon goes, "Yeah, I can still hack gore. I mean, it's not butcher level, but it suddenly gets very gruesome, and some of the deaths are pretty damn creative, and also the logic of how the ghost actually operates gets really fascinating. But what I really liked about it is that I like a supernatural horror where it isn't just like, oh, it's a ghost in a sheet and it hurts you because it comes and punches you, although the ghost is very physical. You reach this point where the laws of reality break down, and time isn't what you think it is, location isn't what you think it is. Stuff that seemed to be a flashback, you're going like, oh, hang on, that wasn't a flashback. There's actually something very complicated going on here, and it's this idea of curses as loops. And there is a very smart bit that's built in earlier on where one of the characters goes, oh, well, I heard this story, because she's asking for urban legends relating to the film school. And he said, well, I heard this story about this thing. And then you go, oh, hang on. No, that actually does feature in. That's not an aside. There's some really tight little plotting going on and some little hints of what's going on. And when you go through that section, you do go, oh, hang on. So this actually all does come together. And then when you have the final payoff, I think the ending is actually very, very ambiguous. And I think that's beautifully done because you can do the reading where you just go, oh, okay, this is a straightforward supernatural horror. But you can also do another reading. That's the one I kind of prefer, where you go, well, this really is about the creative process, and it is about writing yourself into other people's stories. And I think both of those work well. I think it's kind of like Welcome to Pleasantville, where it gets to the end and you go, oh, that's a complicated ending, because it lets you read two different endings in completely that both work. And that ending for me is actually one of the real strong points for it, that makes it both a horror film and a film about making horror films. And that's where it really pulls all its themes together, and that it manages to it doesn't do that lazy thing that a lot of kind of meta scripts try to do, where it goes, oh, and the aristocrats, and just hands you a glib answer. Instead, the ending is worth the trip, and it's worth the revisit, because it's a film where you go back and go, second and third watches of this pay off an awful lot, and bring in a lot more details, and you can start to see things coming in. You'll go, oh, okay, no, this is where seeds are laid, that the more attention you pay to them, the deeper and more interesting and more enigmatic the ending becomes. And that's why I really love this film. I think it's a really smart little movie that challenges you in multiple ways, push the director to look at his own work and look at what other people were doing, and provide a film that is both a version of it and a commentary of it. And that's why the original Scream worked. The original Scream looked at what was happening with slashers and went, we have to talk about this. We have to talk about these films and what our relationship with them is. And this does some very similar things of going like, let's talk about a relationship with these films, and not just like, do we like them, do we hate them, but what's the motivations for making them? What are we putting together? What is our story? What are storytellers getting from telling this kind of story? What are we doing from ripping people off or taking other people's ideas? There's so much to unpack here. It's just a really deep, nuanced film that is also just a banger of a supernatural horror with some really great kills at the end. I will absolutely say that. There is a sequence involving a wall that is so simple, but I'm like, this is just nope, no fun.
It does. So it's the rare movie where like it's a kind of a glib way of saying it, but like every 15, 20 minutes, it went up half a star. It just like, it's a film about acceleration, and it starts, as both of you have said, in sort of like a, J-horror kind of space where like, I've seen this, it feels almost like an American remake of a Japanese horror film, and that it's like very pastoral and high production values, but like a little empty on the inside. And then you realize, okay, they're kind of fucking with me. But the two biggest compliments I could give this film, one is that its big climax has what I can only describe as Clive Barker energy. I am the monster and have been the monster all along. And the other thing that I love about it, and I think part of the reason why it hits different, even between 2019 and 2022, I think this movie hits different. And I think the reason why is because of the way that it deals with trauma. 2-3 years ago, I think we were still in the space where like every horror movie that came out was like, it's an allegory for trauma. We were like, fuck yeah, allegories for trauma. Let's do this. It's deeper, it's smarter, it's more rich than that. And I think that's become such a commonplace thing, especially in indie horror, that it feels, I don't want to say a little played out, but like I am now suspicious of anything that feels overly grief-filled and overly traumatic. And I think what this movie does with the main character and the arc that she has is it sort of asks some unanswered and pointed questions about the appropriative nature and the performative nature of trauma in horror. That you get to this ending, this absolute like whiff of smoke of an ending, and you're like, okay, did she tell someone else's stories? Was it her story to tell? How are we supposed to feel about the negative energy, the trauma that went into the creation of this? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? And it makes it a really interesting counterpoint to 5 years worth of A24 films, where you're basically like, okay, so I feel a little weird, a little icky about kind of like, yeah, show us your trauma, man. Like, take all your sad thoughts and put it on the screen so I can feel good about it. At the end of this, you're sort of like, all right, maybe that's a mode of cinema that we can afford to get a little bit away from.
Yeah, but it's the law of like popular cinema at the same time. It's like once Hereditary is a hit, everyone after that wants to make their Hereditary, or, just going back to any of those trauma-based filmmaking, where that's not to say we haven't gotten tremendous films from it. I mean, like, again, we've gotten films like Relic from that. So we are in a moment in time now where traumatic-based horror, and again, not to say horror has never been traumatic-based, like that's always intertwined, but when you put it to the forefront in the way that it's been put to the forefront, I think everyone immediately thinks that like that trauma-based horror has to be long, slow, brooding, all the stuff that you two dorks love. But like then you get a movie like Warning, Do Not Play, and then it allows Donato to have fun with the traumatic based movie as well. Because it's like, you give me the spooky scaries, you give me those like, even it's the easy scare of the eyes and the darkness coming out of nowhere and like jolting onto the screen. And, it's not to say it's reaching super high at times with the horror, but again, it's just effective. And if it's effective, you don't have to reach super high. And I think, again, that's where I put Warning, Do Not Play in something of a realm with movies that are just watchably entertaining and effective. And I kind of felt everything I wanted to feel in a horror movie. And it did it in under 90 minutes. And it's like a lot of filmmakers could take notes from that.
And it's great because
it's lean. This
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
super lean film, and it's like every scene is there for a reason. And I think it's really been fascinating because I started watching a lot of J horror when stuff started appearing, kind of just post Ring. Um, uh, and I remember being at the Leeds International Film Festival when they still were doing the horror all nighters, and we got the first screening of The Grudge at 4 in the morning when we were all sleep deprived. And that thing comes in, and I'm like, oh God, I don't have time for another film. And it's like, the thing comes in, smashes you in the face, and runs away really fast. And I'm like, huh, it's okay to be brief. You don't even have to hit close to 90 minutes. And I think that was one of the great things about the J horror and K horror explosion was that because Japanese television in particular, there's still space for horror and pretty extreme horror on Japanese television. You'd have stuff that was getting released on tape or on DVD in the States. And it was like, it's 58 minutes because this was on TV, but you're getting it as a film. And I'm like, great. Let's just be lean and efficient. Nothing fucking wrong with that. Horror is like, I can't remember who it was I discussed this with. It was a filmmaker, and basically he said no. Oh, it was Ruben Fleischer. It was actually Ruben Fleischer about Zombieland and Zombieland 2. And he said, I don't think comedy needs to be longer than 90 minutes because if you're genuinely funny for 90 minutes, people will be so tired by laughing, they won't be able to go any further. You've just physically taken them to a limit. And I think a lot of horror can learn that lesson. It's like, if you've got somebody on edge for 90 minutes, give them a break before they have a heart attack. let them go home. Let them go to the concessions. At least let them go pee. It's why horror was the basis for, the classic drive-in double bills and stuff was I love watching. I'm a big fan of Svengoolie, and he has a 2-hour slot, and there are some times where he goes, well, we've got put a lot of padding material because this film is only 62 minutes long, so I'm going to be doing 3 songs and showing you some footage of when I went to C2E2. And I'm like, yeah, more of that. Don't be afraid. Just if you just to use a wrestling phrase, get your shit in and go home. Nothing wrong with that. Oh yeah, that's another thing we didn't touch on. I am actually I am not kidding on this. I am actually as far as I know, I'm the only Rotten Tomatoes certified critic who is also a pro wrestling ring announcer.
I didn't find a natural way to bring that up. I was
going
to say, I never found a natural way.
Jammed it right the fuck in there at the end.
Why not? Like, so yeah, but that it is. It's like get your shit in and get it and go home. And that's there's nothing wrong with that. And this film manages to get its shit in and go home and secretly sneak in a lot of shit that you can go back and really appreciate what it's trying to do.
I'm gonna end it there, and I'm gonna say that in a weird kind of way, I think that makes Warning Do Not Play maybe the best possible certified forgotten film, in that it is a hit for Donato for all the reasons that Donato likes movies. It is a hit with me for all the reasons that I like horror movies. It's under 90 minutes. It's readily available. It's on Shudder. Normally we say, well, how are people going to rediscover it? We're going to make you go rediscover it. Go see this. Give this movie some love. You're already subscribed to Shudder anyways if you're listening to this podcast. You don't need to watch, I don't know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 for an 8th time. You can take an evening and go watch, or at all. I mean, you can take an evening, you can go watch Warning Do Not Play instead, because this movie is a lot of fun, and I can already feel it sitting with me in a way that even among the quality of movies that we watch on this podcast, I can already feel it sitting with me in a way that a lot of those don't.
Yeah, I mean, I won't belabor this, but just to echo what you just said, I'm still baffled that it has so low viewership. It's just one of those things where this would be the part of the podcast where I say, well, it'd have to go to Shudder to find its right audience. And I think
it's on Shudder.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's on Shudder. Maybe it is waiting for one of those releases. Last year's Detention got a release on one of the Vinegar Syndrome sublabels. It's I don't know, maybe Warning Do Not Play has to get that physical release on one of those higher profile distros for indie horror, because I know Shudder is putting out their own movies on Blue, but not a lot of people seem to know about that. It just isn't getting the promo that again, that deserves alone, because movies like Satan's Slaves, where if they went to Netflix, they'd sit there, but on Shudder, you can own Satan's Slaves. You can own these wonderful movies. So, you know what? Warning May Not Play may be on Blue already, but it's not in the Blue it has to be on. And yeah, I'm just baffled that, you know, no one gave this one any mind when it came out. No one.
No, slip by, and I think we do need to go back and do some archaeology and find out, like, what was it everybody was writing about that week, because it must have been something that just distracted. There was some nice bright shiny toy that was like flashed in front of us all, and we're like, ooh, there. And poor Warning Do Not Play was like, hello.
Everyone go back to June 2020 and tell us what you were doing. Tweet at us what you were doing the beginning of June 2020 where you weren't watching this fucking movie.
I choose to take a positive spin and say that there's just so much good horror out there these days that even now,
Me too.
a film like Warning Do Not Play can fall through the cracks.
Yeah, boo. But,
Richard, it has been...
the thing is,
go ahead.
Podcasts like this can help people find these movies and give them the life maybe a little bit after they should have had it in the first place. But you guys do sterling work here. You know, you're putting eyes on films that people may not have seen, or may have dropped off the radar, or were, I mean, the fact you guys kicked off with Found, which is one of my, you want to talk about sub $20,000 movies that I think punched so far above their weight and didn't actually get seen by enough people, but are steadily kind of picking up that audience, and people are becoming aware of them. Although, I still actually have my hand-signed copy that Scott Shermer, where before it got distribution, he did a brief run of DVDs himself, and I did the Q&A for Found at House Call Horror, and as a thank you, Scott gave me the last of that first run. Before then, it actually, they did a proper release, and it turned up at Walmart, and I messaged him and went, did you know when you were in Walmart? And he said, that's the funniest thing in the world, because my super violent, weird, meta, sideways, gruesome horror about, mental and physical torture of a young boy with a lot of erect penis in it is in Walmart. What is this world about? And I think it's phenomenal. And I think there are people who've now, because you guys talked about that and talked about some other films, now those films are getting their audience. So you guys are doing something really valuable here.
You know, I wouldn't use the word hero, Richard, but thank you for...
Neither would I.
I appreciate you for using the word hero in your description. We are. All right. Well, hey, Richard, I know that festival season is almost upon us. And so I know that you're going to be doing a ton of coverage, a ton of interviews, especially for folks who are either traveling to Austin. I think if you don't read Richard because you're not in Austin, but you come to Austin for film festivals, you're kind of fucking up, because he's telling you a lot of things you should probably know about the scene here. Where's the best place for people to go and find your stuff on social media or online?
You can find all my assorted nonsense at austinchronicle.com. If you're in Austin, you can always feel free to pick up an actual physical copy, because we're still in print, baby, still going. 40 years going strong. I've not been there for all of them, but we have a huge archive of all our reviews. I think we got every film that we reviewed going back to 1992 is actually in our online archive, which is kind of insane.
And the first review was a Mark Savlov review, just in case there's any, that dates all the way back to 92.
And we are harsh as well. We have a 5-star rating system, and in the entire history of the Chronicle, we've only given 3 5-star reviews.
Jeez.
M, Ran, and Kagamusha, and that's it. Because if you say Kagamusha is a 5-star review, you got a lot of catching up to do anything even close. It's kind of like this holy grail thing. I'm like, one day I'll find something that's a 5-star. One day I'll get there. So I'm just hoping that we do that. But we always try and be brutally honest, but we always try and be honest. And so yes, austinchronicle.com, and you can find me on Twitter at YorkshireTX, usually starting fights. That's really, really what I do. But then advocating for...
That's absolutely true.
Well, it's not my fault you're wrong.
There's very rarely is there a time where I get a notification that says, "Oh, Richard Whittaker has tweeted at you," where I'm like, "Oh, good."
Oh, it usually I'm saying
this will be productive.
Nice about you than I think anybody else on Twitter.
I love getting texts from you. I love getting emails from you. When I get tweets from you, I get a little sweaty. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, bless.
Donato, man, it's festival season spinning up for you too. Where do people go to find your stuff?
Absolutely. At DonatoBomb on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Instagram. You can also find my Authory page with all of my writing in one single place. Matt Donato on Authory, because I don't feel like listing out all the places I write anymore.
Yep, that's the beauty of it. You can follow me on Authory. It's Matthew Monagle, I think, is the URL there. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt Monagle. And as always, please visit certifiedforgotten.com. We're inches away from a website redesign that we're really, really excited to share with you guys what we've done. Our friend from Mixtape Massacre has done an incredible job with some of the work that he's put together. So check us out on Certified Forgotten. Read the really cool writers that we have to say. And Richard, it may have been late, but we're glad that it happened. Thank you for joining us on the show, man.
Yeah, my pleasure. This has been an absolute blast, guys.
Donato, take us out.
To press play, you jabronis.
So stupid. Every time it's worse.